Welcome to Newshour. Well, the deadline is almost up. President Trump's suspension of reciprocal tariffs will end in just a few hours' time. The global economy then faces the looming spectre of higher tariffs once again, and tensions, understandably, are running high. The iconic car maker Ford made a stark announcement yesterday. Auto executives estimate that President Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminium have cost the company a staggering $2 billion. Now, that information was not offered as a projection or a warning, but rather a very real price tag on what some are calling an economic gamble with global consequences. Ford's statement underscores growing concerns across the auto sector and beyond: higher input costs, disrupted supply chains, and the looming risk of global retaliation. But as we've all seen, Trumponomics is as much about trade deals as it is about tariffs. And the US president has hailed a new trade deal with the European Union as a major league win for American exports. The critics, though, just won't stay quiet, arguing Brussels has been bullied and bludgeoned, reinforcing a negative and inelegant new norm for global diplomacy. Meanwhile, Mr. Trump has issued fresh threats over what he calls Canada's protectionist trade policy, singling out dairy and automotive sectors, and even floating the possibility of excluding Canada from a revised NAFTA agreement altogether. So tonight we examine the latest chapter in this tale of tariffs and trade deals. First, we head over to Washington, D.C., where Kate Fisher has more on that announcement by the Ford Motor Company.
Guy, this is the latest example of how Donald Trump's aggressive trade policies are affecting some of America's biggest companies. And it flags some of the challenges for US manufacturers as Donald Trump seeks to reshape global supply chains. Now, despite building most of its cars here in the US, Ford says it has already paid an extra $800 million in duties in the 3 months ending in June. And that's because, like all automakers in the US, it uses imported parts and materials, and those include tariffs of 50% on imported steel and aluminium. Now, Ford says its estimate of $2 billion in tariff costs for the year is higher than expected because of those levies on imported metals, as well as tariffs on neighbouring countries, Mexico and Canada, where it has plants, and the fact that they've remained higher for longer than expected. Ford said that the White House is aware of how the industry is being affected by these multiple tariffs and that it's working with them to try to reduce the impact. Now, other car makers have reported tariff-related losses as well. Just last week, Ford's US rival General Motors said tariffs had already cost it more than $1 billion, while Volkswagen put its hit at $1.5 billion.
The US-EU trade deal caps most EU imports to the US at 15% tariffs. That's down from the threatened 30%. Now, in return, the EU has pledged $750 billion in US energy purchases and $600 billion in investments over a 3-year period. There is then a lot at stake and a great deal of detail to unpack.
I'm going to let you say, but I think it's the biggest deal ever made. Thank you very much.
A new landmark trade deal between the United States and the European Union seeks to fundamentally rebalance their economic relationship. Energy security is a core focus. The US is already a dominant EU energy partner, supplying 55% of LNG in 2025 and 17% of oil in 2024, alongside 700 million euros in nuclear fuel and services by 2024. Under the agreement, the European Union is now committing to purchase $750 billion in US energy and make new investments of $600 billion in the United States, all by 2028. for most EU exports to the US, including cars, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors, will be at a new 15% tariff. This rate is notably lower than President Donald Trump's previously threatened 30%. However, steel, aluminium, and copper exports will continue to face a 50% US tariff. Meanwhile, the European Commission anticipates that established quotas will eventually reduce this effective rate, and the US government expects to generate tens of billions in annual revenue. Conversely, the EU has committed to imposing 0% tariffs on US goods, aiming to eliminate existing sectoral duties, such as the 10% tariff previously applied to car imports. The White House highlights this as providing unprecedented market access for American producers seeking to expand into the European market. The deal also aims to reduce Europe's reliance on Russian fuel. In 2024, the EU still imported about 22 billion euros of fossil fuels from Russia and about 700 million euros worth of nuclear supplies. Despite the administration's optimistic framing, reaction in Europe has been far more critical. French Prime Minister François Bayrou labelled the agreement a dark day for the bloc, warning it risks hollowing out European industry and weakening economic sovereignty. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz echoed these concerns, stating the deal will cause considerable damage to European exporters and undermine the European Union's competitiveness in the global economy. Beyond these direct tariff impacts, the deal has broader implications for global energy supply chains and geopolitical alliances. According to the experts, the deal may bolster trade along the Middle Corridor, a vital land and sea route connecting Europe to Central Asia. Increased US and EU cooperation in industrial goods and logistics could boost transit traffic through these countries, potentially helping to offset some of the trade imbalances created by the new tariff structure.
Now, with the tariff deadline looming, things in the US capital are heating up. Let's speak now to our very own Ube Shah-Banda, who is out and about on a very warm Washington morning. Ube, thanks very much for bearing the heat for us. Let's start with this story then about Ford claiming Trump tariffs cost the company $2 billion. You're there in DC, out and about, speaking to the politicians, the analysts. What do they make of this?
Well, the message from the White House is that August 1st is August 1st, and that deadline for tariffs for all the other countries, America's major trading partners, to make a deal is not going to be extended anymore. Earlier, President Trump posted a lengthy post on social media saying that tariffs, regardless of the short-term pain that they may be caused on the supply chain, that ultimately they will make America rich and great again, in the words of President Trump. He went on to say that for years, other countries had imposed tariffs on American goods that ultimately was not fair for the American consumer. It made America poorer. And that now, with President Trump's tariff plans on a number of major trading partners for the United States, that the American worker and the American people will finally recoup those costs, and that there is an expectation by the Trump administration to bring in a windfall of cash and revenue to the American Treasury by these tariffs. Now, of course, some American companies that depend on steel supply chains or the import of steel from other countries like Ford have long been worried about the impact on their own bottom line. And with Canada, America's partner to the north, and its second largest trading partner, right now on the cusp of facing major American tariffs on its steel and aluminum exports to the United States, automakers like Ford are saying that they need more time, that while they appreciate President Trump's policy to keep American cars being produced in America and to protect the American auto workers, particularly those in the state of Michigan that came out in large numbers to support President Trump during the presidential election. That Ford is saying that these tariffs is going to cost them a significant amount of lost revenue, but that is not really going to impact President Trump's policy position on tariffs, saying that this August 1st deadline is set firmly in stone. Of course, President Trump sent that letter on July 10th to Canada, threatening tariffs of upwards of 35% if a deal is not made. Now, President Trump is no longer calling Canada as being that it needs to join the United States, but it doesn't seem that President Trump is unmoved from his previously stated position that he believes that Canada has long imposed its own trade barriers on American exports, and that Canada's steel and aluminum exports, of which Canada depends on America as being its largest market, will find themselves in America's tariff crosshairs if they don't reach a deal. They have about a day left.
Okay, Ube, and give us the reaction, please, to this deal with the EU. Now, it's been described in Europe as President Trump bludgeoning Brussels, Ursula von der Leyen showing subservience to a bully, lots of other similar dramatic descriptions. How is it seen, though, in Washington?
Well, it's being seen as a dramatic success, the art of the deal. President Trump keeps referring to himself as the deal maker in chief, as the president. And that deadline of August 1st seems to have really been a forcing function for Ursula von der Leyen to reach a deal before that deadline before they cross that threshold of that August 1st deadline. So those letters that President Trump, that he sent to the EU, to Canada, to China, to a number of other countries around the world were essentially an ultimatum. Either you reach a deal, you lower your own trade barriers for American exports, such as American vehicles and other American-produced goods, or regardless of what happens, that August 1st deadline will mean an imposition of tariffs of potentially upwards of 30%. The European Union leaders, they blinked. They did not want that American tariffs because they essentially believed President Trump that he was not bluffing, and with the United States being the world's largest economy, 400 million people, a massive market for European goods, leadership in Brussels believed that they had no other choice.
Ube, we don't want to keep you too long. We don't want you melting in this heat, but just very quickly, a word please on South Korea and also these fresh threats aimed now at Canada.
Yeah, these fresh threats on social media to Canada, South Korea, to India are essentially being used by President Trump to tell the leadership of those countries, you better make this deal quick or I am going to impose punishing tariffs. I don't care what happens here in the U.S. Maybe it'll lead to a jump in costs briefly, but this is part of President Trump's overarching political philosophy and trade philosophy. And the fact that he is signaling to countries like South Korea and India, which have significant amount of trade with the U.S., that President Trump is willing to impose punishing tariffs if those countries don't lower their own trade barriers, including value-added tax, including regulations that are major obstacles to American companies in doing business in places like India and South Korea, that those massive tariff spikes, which will cause a major impact on those countries' economies, will take place. So the question is it's tick-tock, tick-tock. Will those countries reach an 11th hour deal? The White House is confident, given that their success with the negotiations with the United Kingdom and the EU, that other countries will follow suit.
Ube, many thanks for joining us, as always. Well, that is all for this edition of Newshour. As the deadline for suspended reciprocal tariffs ticks closer, tensions are heating up as global markets brace for impact. From all of us here at A News, thanks for being with us.